All right, guys. So I just got done with like hour and a half to 2 hour meeting talking to teachers. Um, that was very stressful. So I'm just gonna get through this and make this as quick as I can. But anyway, so today's lesson is gonna be degrees and radians. So let's just jump into it. Basically, radians are just another way to measure angles. So right now we've been measuring angles in terms of degrees. Now we're going to switch to radians. It's kind of like how we have inches versus centimeters. They both do the same thing. They're just a different way to measure things. And they have their pros and cons. But anyways, radians, you're measuring angles and they're written in terms of pi. Now, what's the most obvious degrees that we think of? Well, the most obvious degrees that we think of are going to be 180 degrees, right? And 360 degrees. So a 180 is a half turn, 360 is a full turn. A radian, 180 degrees in radians would be 1 pi. And 360 degrees, a full turn in radians would be 2 pi. So just using that as a context. Now there's a whole kind of explanation where radians come from, but since we're not in a classroom, I'm not going to bore you with an explanation because I doubt I could do that just recording. But if you are curious, just search where radians come from on YouTube. You'll find plenty of videos. I'm just going to show you how to convert between radians and degrees for this lesson. So here are the formulas for converting. These you are supposed to know. So if you are going from degrees to radians, you multiply by pi over 180. If you are going from radians back to degrees, you multiply by 180 over pi. So they're pretty much the same formula, just flipped. So let's just jump into it. So first we'll start with converting from radians to degrees. I know these are in radians because I see pi. So that's the indicator. Plus there's no degree symbol. So that's obvious too. So if you see pi, then it is in radians. So to convert from radians to degrees, you multiply by 180 over pi. So 180 over pi. And then when you multiply fractions, they both need to be a fraction. So the 2 pi, I'm going to turn that into a fraction by putting it over 1, the same way you would do to anything into a fraction. And if you remember fractions, you multiply top times the top and the bottom times the bottom. So if I do that, then I would get 2 times 180 is 360 pi, and then on the bottom would be 1 times pi. Though you don't really need the 1 there, so I'm going to erase the 1. And then you would just simplify this from here. So the pi cancels out the pi, and you're just left with 360 degrees. So 2 pi is 360 degrees. The next example is 2 pi over 9. Again, you'll know it's radians because it has the pi symbol, and you convert it by multiplying by 180 over pi. Top times the top gives you 360 pi, and the bottom times the bottom gives you 9 pi. And then just simplify it from here. Now you have to simplify, you can't just leave it how it is. So cancel out the pi, and 360 divided by 9 would be 40 degrees, I believe. Don't cancel out pi in real life. Pi is delicious. Not as good as cake, though. Last one, I have negative 3 pi over 2. Again, convert from degrees to, or from radians to degrees. So 180 over pi. Now, the fraction was negative, so that means my answer is going to be negative. So make sure you carry over the sign. And then 3 times 180 is 540 pi. And on the bottom would be 2 pi. Cancel out the pi, and then divide 200 or 540 divided by 2, and you would get 270. And just make sure it's negative. All right, so there you go. Negative 3 pi over 2 gives you negative 270. All right, the next example is going to be going backwards, going from degrees to radians. You use basically the same formula, except it's going to be flipped. So you're going to multiply by pi over 180 this time. Still the same steps. Put the other side, make it into a fraction, put it over 1. Multiply top times the top, so that would give you 30 pi. And multiply the bottom would give you 180. Now from here, you have to simplify the fraction. You can't just leave it. And you do not change it to a decimal. Radians are never in decimals. So you could simplify this by figuring out the largest number that goes into both of these evenly. In this case, it'd be 30, but let's say I didn't know that. Well, you could take it step by step. So let's say divide by 10, because I know 10 goes into 30 and 180, so that would give you 3 on the top and 18 on the bottom. And then you would check to see if you can simplify it any more. And in this case, you can, because 3 goes into the top and the bottom. So that would give you, so divide by 3 on the top and bottom. So that would give you, let's see, 1 pi over 6. You can write the 1 if you want to, but you don't really need it. So there you go. 30 degrees is going to be 1 pi over 6. 720 degrees, again, multiply by pi over 180. Make this a fraction. Your answer is you multiply top times the top and the bottom times the bottom. Now in this case, 180 divides both of these evenly. So I'm just going to divide 720 divided by 180, and that would give you 4 on the top, and on the bottom, when you divide by 180, you would get 1. Now, if you didn't know that 180 divides both evenly, then you could just take it step by step like I did the first one, but I already know these because I've worked these out ahead of time. And 4 pi over 1 is the same as just 4 pi. All right, so and then the last one is when you have a negative, again, make sure your answer is negative. So multiply by pi over 180. Your answer is going to be negative 80 pi over 180. And then again, you have to simplify these. This is one of the few cases where I'm going to force you to simplify. And you could divide by 10 or divide by 2 or take it step by step, but I know, because I've worked these out ahead of time, I know that 20 divides both of these evenly. So I'm going to divide both of the numbers by 20. That's going to make this go the fastest. So divide by 20, you get negative 4 on the top. Well, just 4 on the top, and then 180 divided by 20 is 9. So negative 4 pi over 9. All right, so that's today's lesson, converting. These trig sections are going to start to get a lot more difficult pretty soon. As always, make sure that, well, here's your homework. As always, make sure that you message me if you have any issues submitting assignments on SB, or if you have any issues understanding it, the lesson. Yeah, just keep in touch if you have any issues.